Okay, so Vicki Jo Russell. Who are you? Vicki Jo Russell is passionate about nature, sustainable natural resource management, and people who work to achieve it. Her background includes travelling the world with her family from a young age, a degree in psychology and biology, and an ability to think in an integrated and conceptual way. With a love of all things natural from a young age, Vicki Jo, or VJ as she is known by many, has been a driving force in biodiversity conservation in South Australia for over 25 years. She's going to tell us more about herself in due course. I just want to tell you a couple more things. In 2014, she was awarded the South Australian Premier's Award for Services to Natural Resources Management. She is a recipient of the Order of Australia. And most importantly, I think, she is a skilled belly dancer.
You have to prioritise, don't you?
So we're very fortunate to have her here to present to us today on the nature of SA, and without further ado, I'd like you to welcome her.
Thank you very much, and I'm well aware of the time, and we've had a lot of information and a lot of really exciting speakers. So thank you for being here, because this is the last stretch before you have an opportunity to collapse on your beds, then try and freshen up, and then come here and I'd love to dance, but I cannot see how it's going to be physically possible, but that's a challenge.
Maybe tonight.
Maybe tonight, yeah. I was thinking, I was sitting there thinking, oh, how can you express your passion for nature? And I kid you not, a rainbow lorikeet crapped on my head. I was just round the corner. And I thought, is it too late to rewrite this? Because I'm not getting a lot of support here. Now, who's heard of Nature of SA? Okay, well, my job here is done. Some things will be familiar and some things will be different. For those who have heard me talk before, and to ensure that there are efficiency dividends in this talk, I will try and include as many buzzword bingo words as I can. That may be a challenge a bit beyond me, but I've done one, so it's at least been worthwhile listening to me start. So what is the nature of SA? Okay, so that's working because I can't see it at all?
That is working.
Okay, great. Look, it's a partnership project that's really creating the space in which we can stop and have a think about the way we approach and do practices for nature conservation. And it's not just creating a space to stop and think about whether or not what we're doing is going to hold us in good stead in the future. It's allowing us to do it together. And also by being a co-designed project between government and community and NGOs and industry and academics, it's creating a space where people can take more risks with their thinking. Because risk taking is one of the great barriers that people have told us about so far. A lot of people are sitting there going home and going, I know that if I have to continue to weed that patch for another 15 years with the same outcomes, I'm not sure I'm going to cope, because I really want to be making a difference. But if I say something like that round the table, it won't get support. So this is allowing a place where we can talk about things that are on our mind so we can go forward, because we have to go forward, because we have to be good. It's as simple as that. If we're not good, the stuff we really care about and that matters to South Australia is going to disappear. So we're not mucking around. Right. I say that, but I can't actually work the projector. So that's what it is. So why did it start? Well, it had a number of things, a perfect storm, as you'd say. Firstly, the No Species Lost strategy, it was up for review and renew. And there were quite a few workshops to review it and some desktop. And what it said was, you know what, this contains all the things that we would expect a good biodiversity strategy to have. And then you ask the next question is, did it do anything? And almost categorically, people said no. It didn't influence, it didn't create more opportunities or more resources, it didn't move more people to join us, it didn't change the goalposts for the state. So if that's not what a biodiversity strategy for a state is going to do, then we've got something wrong. So it's like, okay, well, what do we need to change that? And at the same time we're asking, what does the strategy need to look like to be effective? We're seeing more and more evidence coming through the literature, and I'll talk about some of the literature in particular a little bit later, that's saying, look, change is happening, change has already happened, landscape change is just beyond recognition. what we've been planning for, what we've been using as our past references, they're just not relevant anymore. The way we're working as governance, this idea of centralising, creating policy that will work for people in local areas to problem solve for their particular culture, their particular problem, their particular needs, it's just not working. So there's a whole thing. And so one of the things we're trying to create on the Nature of SA website is a place where a lot of this stuff can be found easily, because not everybody has access to it. But what it's saying is there are definitely signs for the need for change. Here's something that some people may have seen, this Planetary Dashboard that's around the Great Acceleration. And what it basically says is, look, we've been puddling along since the Industrial Revolution. But since the 50s, we've really gone gangbusters. That's not what we'll use tomorrow for our Landcare going gangbusters. But we have. And so things like population exponentially grown, water use exponentially grown, clearance, fuel use, you get the picture. So all the stuff on the red is all the use development indicators that we've got across the planet. And then matching that, very similar, in fact I believe there's a synergy between those two sides. You can pay me for this later, people. Are things like carbon emissions, increased surface temperature, increased acidity, increased deforestation. So if you're sitting there in your lounge feeling like things have gone berserk, here is the evidence to say that that's right. It has. In fact, we are now in a place that is almost unrecognisable in some of our systems. So how do you use a reference point when you're actually going into a system that is now almost irrecognisable, and we really can't predict where it's going to go? That's a huge challenge for us, but it's the one that we're facing. That's how the planet is looking, how we're going in South Australia. Now, I actually first put this in when I went and talked interstate, because I thought, well, maybe people interstate, because I think someone was saying before they don't care about us. I think it was the minister, actually. There's some homework for him. I thought they may not know our context. So I thought, well, it's good to refresh. And then I thought, actually, it's good for South Australians to refresh. So 87% of our state is arid, which doesn't mean it's not productive. It doesn't mean it's not livable, but it means it's hard work, doesn't it? And our choices are less. The other, we've got 6% marine, still in relatively good tact. And then we've got this 13% of arable land where we actually have some choices. And a lot of that's cleared. So that's kind of what we've got to play with. And I reckon that's quite a sobering thing to remember when we're sort of, going on in this infinite system. Infinite capitalist paradigm. There's another word for the bingo. All the natural resource trends are going in reverse except for the social capital. Okay, so we know this. 1,000 species with evidence of decline is just one of those. There's also evidence that the temperature's already changed, and colleague Nick, the team at Adelaide University, they can already show you on the land, on the ground, where some of that temperature has already shifted and by how much. But we've also got this amazing group of people, skilled, passionate, prepared to punch above their weight. Gosh, they have to be prepared to do that. And overall, very poorly resourced. In fact, I think Tasmania generally is the only state that gets less than us. So it's really interesting to see, given all this stuff that we create, we really do amazing things on the smell of an oily rag, but maybe the fumes are drying up now. We have these commitments. We have some actually pretty good, lofty environmental commitments, but they're always compromised against this focus for jobs and the economy. And no wonder, because the state actually doesn't know how it's going to pay for its future. Do you know where my kids are going to have a job or their kids are going to have a job? Do we know what South Australia is going to offer in the global or national economy? We're not clear on that. We've had these pillars. Some of them aren't working anymore because of global shifts. Some of them aren't going to work because of climate. What are we going to do? And that's our problem as much as any other South Australian. So it's just something, I really enjoyed Jodie's talk, and it helped me really think about that one a little bit differently. Environment, nature, biodiversity, I don't care what you call it, it's pretty much invisible in the narrative. And I think it's become less visible over time. So I was very fortunate. I came into the movement in the late 80s. You basically, I was at the Conservation Centre. It was a great throng of activity, all these different people coming in and out. You had all these inquiries. Oh, how I deal with all these inquiries. There was always a media release. There was always a media interview going on in the library. It's pretty quiet now. None of the need has gone away, and none of the care, because we know that 94% of South Australians care about the environment. We're just not talking about it. And we also know that we have a very centralised population and an ageing one. So I just reflect this, that everything that we come up with going forward has to be working for a win-win-win in the context of some of these bigger challenges. So scientific literature is saying it's going to be increasingly challenging about the way we've been doing things. This is not an effective strategy. And we have to be open to new ways. So what is some of the literature saying? Well, they're saying that we must go beyond protection. We need to think about the important role of human-dominated landscapes. We will need to be more interventionist, and we'll need to be prepared to do that, to keep things in the landscape. We will have no choice but to accept more change than we are used to and than we want to. That, for a person who's worked in threatened species recovery for 25 years, is a very sobering thing to say, and I've had to really, really grapple with it. And also we're dealing with this fact that a lot of people care, but the policy that we're seeing, and this is state, national, global, less and less reflects what ordinary people really care about. What is going on with that? And the only way to deal with that is through local governance and community movements. And again, we had several speakers talk about the importance of that, and I'd love to see us fan one of those coming out of South Australia. So the last thing, I think it's the last thing. No, that's not the last thing. Cripes. Why did it start? People wanted to actually work together. They were reaching out and saying, we need to do something that's bigger than just us, and we wanted to make it count. And the only way to do that is to climb across those silos. And let's not kid ourselves. It's kind of, it's pretty sobering. This is the Mount Lofty Ranges Southern Emu Wren. There's a number of people that I recognise in the room who have worked on that species over 25 years. It's one of the longest running recovery teams in the country and pretty successful by that standard. However, and we have literally done all the right things, you know, looked at protected areas, looked at fencing, looked at connectivity, done huge extension programs, but will drought have the last laugh? We've really got to think, do we have enough tools in our kit bag to deal with some of these kinds of challenges? And I reckon we should try and think outside the box a lot more. And some of these threatened species, it may be too late, but it's a good chance for us to experiment, because we're going to have to think differently from what we have. So, disruptive, eh? Okay. It's getting harder to ignore the signs. And so that's what we've decided to do. We've decided to disrupt the conversation, shake it up, and try and encourage us all to evolve in our thinking, because it won't happen without the support, love, culture, acceptance within the movement. So once we sort of had this kind of, okay, here are some things that we're fundamentally letting us down in the strategy, we said, well, what needs to look different? And why are we raising these things now? One thing that people said was that change felt like it was in the distance 10 years ago, and we still thought if we had more resources and more people and more of everything, and we just kept doing more of what we were doing, that would be enough, and if only people would fund us. But actually people's acceptance of that has changed. There are some things that if we just do more of, it still won't cut it. And so that has shifted in the last 10 years. And another thing is people are just starting to see that the governance that we've got in place, and I'm not having about any particular governance, but that it has to evolve, it has to bring new skills in. We have to think about the way we work differently, and that's challenging all of us as individuals. So we've had a lot of conversations. We went around the state, the strategy working group team went around the state. We spoke to over 350 people in the regions. We spoke to lots of groups. We spoke to some special people who were leaders in aligned sectors. We talked to academics. And then we held this 200-strong forum in the beginning of the year. And we put all this back. We said, this is what we've heard from you, and this is what we're putting back to you. Have we heard this correctly? Is this where we need to go? Because some of these things will be quite challenging. And what we heard was that we're very proud of what we've done, and we don't want to in any way bag that. But we realise that we have to go on, and we have to go on honouring the past. We need to lift our horizon. We need to be thinking much more future-focused. We need to stand tall, and we need to be brave to tackle some of the things ahead. This stuff about the future is incredibly important, and I've got some questions at the end that I'll ask you to go back and either think to yourself or your business or your group It's a very simple one, and Trees for Life have done it, and it's raised all sorts of challenges for us, which we're now working through. Because the past no longer has the blueprint. That's basically what it comes down to. We need to act collectively, and we need to make it loud, and we have 6 significant shifts we need to make. So I'll speak briefly about those. So one is, if it's not going to stand the test of time, change it or stop it. So I've given an example here of seed. We at Trees for Life are really exploring this business of provenance, and whether or not always having close provenance is going to serve us well. And we're also very concerned about how we will source seeds in future, because we sort of assume that sourcing seeds across the landscape to do the job that we want to do will always be there. But then if you're involved with programs with particular species, and I am in the southeast, where we're just seeing some things drying in the dry weather, they're just not coning, they're just not fruiting, that stuff's just starting, the yield is getting reduced. It's like, okay, those things aren't assumptions we can make anymore. So what might we need to do to prepare for that? And I really think we need to think about a revegetation strategy. We haven't had one for 15 years that looks at all this carbon conversation, that looks at all these ecosystem services we've been talking about, all these regional plans, all the stuff we're talking about with SEBs, and talk about our seed sourcing spots of the years to come. But yeah, we haven't been prepared to have that sort of conversation today. So we're challenging lots of things. Are we really aiming for species versus function in the landscapes to come? Are we only really going to prioritise our remnants versus altered? We know that all biodiversity makes an impact. Are we going to just look at translocations, or are we going to be really brave and do rewilding? And what else do we need to try? And can we be actually harvesting food for species in the landscape based on food that we eat, where birds, for instance, like the regent parrot, are currently competing? Now, if I wanted to actually feed a regent parrot quickly, I'd put in a horticulture crop. I wouldn't put in a mallee, because that's going to take me another 20 years to get the food. Are we ready to do that yet? I don't know. I'm not the person with the answers. I'm an annoying person with a lot of questions. We then have stuff that we know works. So protected areas. Everything we know about them says they are great and they will hold us in good stead. There are things we could be doing better to manage them, in the way we locate them, the way we connect them, but they're definitely a tool for the future. And I'm going to, and I know Keith will appreciate this, I'm going to have a little individual protest. I would like to see corridors back on the table. I know that it has never actually gone away, but it has, and it is one of those things that the literature says is a really key way going forward. I'm not talking about the blobs, I'm talking about a genuine review of the way that we engage with corridors, because these are 2 ways that we know we've got a lot of evidence will help us going forward. So we need to do them, we need to do them better. We need to value all nature, even in the smallest place and even in the most concrete corner. One of the things that, in prioritising and always giving images of really wild places, is we've actually isolated a lot of people who don't relate to those environments, and we in some ways say that those things don't count, but we know in a landscape they all do. I think we've actually done some things that we haven't intended to do in the way that we talk about nature. It's really interesting. I was in an interview last week at the show, which was terrifying, and the woman was saying, I physically don't really want to go out and do a big hike. I'm like, you don't have to do that to connect with nature. Like, it's here. It's amongst us all the time. And you don't have to feel like just because you're not prepared to drive for 2 days, you can't connect. You can connect anywhere with a little bit of imagination. And connecting with nature is one of the other key bits of the work that we have already started to do through a project called Nature Amongst It, which is trying to look at the narrative, the way that we're talking about nature in our daily lives as South Australians. That's what we would like people to see. Nature, taking care of nature, well, that's just what South Australians do. And we're working with a lot of unusual suspects, in theory, to try and change that conversation. We will be providing some seed funding for projects to explore what that looks like in different regions and for different communities. So I'd really encourage you to have a think about what you could do in that space. And when we're talking to people about nature, who was I talking to? I think it was the playwright I was talking to last night, about the fact that, when you're a kid, you just love it, and then you go, oh, I want to learn more about it, and then you kind of get told you've got to be objective. And you only really know something if you've got all those ecological indicators in your head. And it actually stops you talking about why you fell in love with it in the first place. I just love it because I am at my best in nature, always. And so why wouldn't I? And this is a picture of me, obviously, as a youngie, going on one of my many camping trips, which my mum was a very great educational teacher and just got me out it. And the other one is my daughter. When we travelled around Australia in 2015, I homeschooled my kids for a year, travelling around Australia, and my husband and I said, we actually can't talk about the wounds. We can't talk about how it looks different from the last time we were here. Or, you know, last time we were in this landscape, gee, that buffel grass, and I'm telling you, gee, that buffel grass is extraordinary, how much it's created a desert in the land. We didn't want to do that for our kids. We wanted them to have a chance to fall in love with nature the way that we did, unscarred and just with an open heart. And I really hope that we've done that, and I hope that that picture of my daughter Acacia is evidence. So we need to talk to each other and others about what we love about it and make it personal, because nature is very personal. Thank you. We also need many skills and many voices, and I won't talk too much about that because I've already talked about it. There are lots of perspectives, there are far more skills. We've often had conversations about social scientists. We start it, but then we don't go all the way. We talk about businesses and then we don't go all the way. It's time to go all the way. And I also want to just put a challenge back to all of us about our personal resilience. It is really hard to be a conservationist and a sustainable natural resource management person. I love this quote by Leopold. It is really hard. You know, it's like sometimes I like to go outside of my own state because then it's like, well, I don't recognise the weeds, or the weeds aren't necessarily my problem to do something about. It's like a holiday from what you can see around you, which hurts because you can't see it for the other anymore. And it hurts to be like this. And then you've got all that loss, and then you've got to justify what you do as well. And then you've got to hear again, you know, well, we've had another haircut. It's hard work, and a lot of people are grieving, and there's a lot of evidence that a lot of people are grieving. The last quote, and obviously you could tell why the psychologist coming out of me, there is this phenomenon called psychic numbing. So basically, if you are in traumatic situations, or you're in persistent grief, you go into this thing called psychic numbing, which allows you to function. It's great. I mean, it's a protective mechanism. It allows you to just tone it all down. But what it also does is it tones down your creativity, your flexibility, your ability to have joy, your ability to think outside the box. You know, it's a short-term mechanism to get you through the bulk of the grief, but a lot of us have had to deal with that for years, and we've actually forgotten how to do the other. The only way through that is to recognise that that's what you're going through and to embrace it and work through it. That is the only way to get through psychic. If it was an easier thing, I'd promise you I'd tell you what it is. But I just think, you know, we need to look after ourselves. We need to get through the other side so we are our best, and we need to look after our colleagues because they're very precious. All of you are very precious. I might change my mind about that after dinner. We also need to learn differently. And I mean, I really advise you to go and have a look at triple loop learning. I can't possibly do it justice, but it's the kind of learning you do when you're actually not sure of what you're trying to achieve in the first place, which is what uncertainty is. It's like, okay, well, I think we're aiming for this, and then you come back and you check it. Yes, we are still aiming for this. Well, actually, the science have now said that that's not possible. So this is a different way of approaching problem solving while still giving you a path and allowing you to do those check-ins. And we also have to be sharing much more with each other, and that's something we're definitely working on, and we're working on a learning program inside of DUNA to see how we can pick up some good examples of how this could be done. So what's next? Well, we're going to revise the discussion paper based on what we've heard and give that back to people so that they can think about that and respond. We are already engaged in this Nature Amongst It project. There will be seed funding, and we're part of Open State. So we'll be talking to people part of Open State, but also we'll have these pop-up stands, and we'll be asking people to talk about nature and how they respond to some of the images and the messages that we're sort of developing to see if it works for people. We're going to be testing the shifts. We've got a prospectus that's being developed, and we would love to showcase people. And I know every single region has an example of this, so we need to get those reported and recorded and communicated. As I said, there's a learning framework review going on inside of DUNA. We are trying to talk to other agencies and other communities of interest about this, how they feel about it and how they can help. And we're also going to be developing a principles of nature approach, which will largely be the replacement for the no species loss strategy, although I say that and I don't necessarily have full agreement of that around the table. We're still working on what that document will look like. So there's lots of people involved around the table and in the conversation. And I would just say that quite a few of them are here. If you're a swagger, a strategy working group member, could you put up your hand? Okay, so thank you, Joe. So we're all going to be here for tonight. And there'll also be some opportunities. We've got a speed networking session tomorrow to ask more questions. Most of us won't be going anywhere, so please come up and ask us some more questions. And that's some contact details. And the last thing I'll say to you is that this is really up to you where this goes from here. So we are here. I've given her, she said, 2 minutes to go, she'll come here, then she'll start dinging. It's great. The shifts are out there. What I need you to do is actually go away and say, what does that mean for my work? And you don't have to do all of them at once. You might just want to start off with the one that really resonates with you. We can support, and please tell us how we can, but ultimately this comes up to all of us to go away and apply it to our own work. And already the South East NRM board is thinking about how it can do that. There's been a local government that said perhaps our next biodiversity strategy could be of that ilk, and Trees for Life have certainly leapt into doing that in our space. I'll let you read the rest of that in the notes. So how will you approach change? It's real and we need to do something about it. There's 3 quotes here. One I didn't get a chance to type up. One is, I don't want to give up. We heard that in the region, and no one's asking you to. And I thought Paul Keiker's response was a really good one to that. He's saying it's not giving up, it's simply changing tack and learning from what is patently obvious around us. And also we had another participating observer person who came into the forum to just look at what we were doing, and she said, I felt an enormous relief. At last we're finally asking questions that we need to, and the right people around the room are prepared to have the conversation. So that, we've got all the options of how you want to respond. Maybe start slow, have a think about it, but at the very least, take care of yourself while you're doing it, because as I said before, you're very precious. Thank you.